To you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace.
The Doolittle Raiders were actually supposed to bomb Tokyo on the 19th of April, 1942. But they were discovered 10 hours ahead of schedule and had to take off early. The 19th of April is Patriots' Day. 242 years ago today, the shot that was heard around the world was fired at Lexington and Concord when our militia decided to fight for our own freedom and security. And 167 years later, the Doolittle Raid took place on the 18th of April, 1942, 75 years ago today. Before Jake comes in, I wanted to just point out a couple things to you. On the Doolittle Raid, 3 men were killed when they were forced to crash land, and several were injured. One man was injured so bad he had to have his leg amputated right there in China. Several of the men come down with malaria and were hospitalized in all places, Karachi, India, if you can imagine that, in 1942. The only way they could get cool was baking in a tub of ice. 8 men were captured by the Japanese, and 3 were executed, and their remains cremated. Of the 5 that were captured, they spent 40 months in captivity. Waterboarding is not something new, folks. It just happened. These men were waterboarded and tortured every day. That's no exaggeration. They were tortured every day. Bamboos behind their knees, and the Japs would jump on them. One man starved to death while he was there, and the other 4 lived to come home. I want to tell you a story, because you didn't come here to listen to me. But I want to tell you about a story about Jacob DeShazer. Jake was one of the men captured who spent, this is solitary confinement incidentally. But in the last year, one of the Jap guards gave him a Bible, and Jake read the Bible every day, through and through and through, and memorized most of it. He made a compact with the Lord that that if he lived, he would serve God for the rest of his life. And he did. He came home, got a degree in divinity, and served God for the next 30 years in Japan, converting the Japanese to Christianity. Go backwards to December the 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor, and commander of the Japanese fighter pilots and bombers coming into Pearl Harbor was Mitsuo Fuchida, F-U-C-H-I-D-A. This is how history is so paradoxical. One of the converts of Jake DeShazer in Japan was Mitsuo Fuchida, who converted to Christianity and traveled with Jake DeShazer even here in the United States, and became a devout Christian. I wanted to tell you this story to give you a little more context about this man you're about to meet. And I'll read this little paragraph. While the men have slowly faded away, the deed will never fade. Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Cole.
How were you chosen to be a member of Colonel Doolittle's crew?
How were you chosen to be a member of General Doolittle's crew?
Well, I could make up a lot of stories about that, but what really happened is that I was screwed up with another pilot, and on this particular day, we had trained about 3 times, and Colonel Doolittle had not been there, and he came in. In the meantime, his co-pilot that he had really wanted, had some kind of an accident. And going along with that, the co-pilot that I had became ill and wasn't going to be able to go on the mission. So all Colonel Doolittle did was take his seat, and the rest of the crew and I were the baggage that went along with him.
Colonel Cole, what was the most memorable event you can remember at Doolittle Raid? If there's one specific thing maybe that's the most memorable.
One specific thing that you remember about the Doolittle Raid, if anything stands out?
Well, I'll tell you the story about what kind of a guy he was. In the B-25 Navigator well-known airplane, there's a master compass that's enclosed in a box. And the compass is down below and the box part is up above. In other words, you put something in, you'd be laying on the face of the compass. And one of the things that he instructed us on to make sure we didn't get into trouble was that people had a habit of putting metal things in over the compass, which is bad, because you get an erroneous reading. And Hank Potter, the navigator, had his .45 pistol in that compartment. And we got in the airplane was the first time with Colonel Doolittle. And he reminded us of that not to put anything metal in that area. And a few days later, we were getting in the airplane, and Hank had put the holster in that area, which was nothing but leather, and had to drop someplace else. Colonel Doolittle didn't see that the gun wasn't in the holster, and so he reminded Hank about that, and Hank explained, he said that it's the holsters, just the holsters in the box. And so Doolittle looked at it again, and he said, well, yeah, that's one of the things you're going to have to put up with me. I'm always jumping to conclusions.
What position were you in?
What position were you on in the plane, Dad?
I was a co-pilot.
There's 5 crew members on that plane: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, gunner, and bombardier. Our crew chief, they had the crew chief and the gunner switched out. I mean, same person, 2 jobs.
Did any of the crew ever jump out of a parachute out of the plane before the Doolittle Raid?
think so.
Only General Doolittle.
Colonel Doolittle had already jumped twice.
And crashed twice.
That was your first jump, Bill? Was that your first parachute jump?
And last.
Yes.
Was the plane able to land in China?
Was the plane able to land in China?
No, a few things happened in between, what was planned and how it worked out. Initially, we were supposed to launch at night on the 19th of April. As we approached Japan, and were picked up by a Japanese fishing boat that had a long-range radio in it. They notified Japan that they'd seen two carriers, so we had to launch early. That's put us over Tokyo at high noon instead of dawn. The Colonel Doolittle wanted to be picked up by him. His original plan was to take off at dusk on the 19th, and fly all night, and drive over China at the daytime, gas up and go on to a place called Kunming, where the American volunteer group was. And so in the meantime, they had a Homer station that we were supposed to be able to make the approach to the field with. But on the way there, the homing airplane crashed, and we didn't have a Homer. And on top of that, the weather was terrible. There was a big warm front that it turned out that it was some help to us. It created a wind, a tailwind, that helped us while we were flying over the China Sea. And with about a 35 knot tailwind, a wind that the natives called kamikaze wind, and that's one reason all the airplanes were able to make it to the China coast, except the one that went to Russia. Otherwise, there would have been B-25s all over.
As they were going across the Pacific, they flew low after they left the Hornet to stay under radar, even though the Japanese knew they were coming because of those pickets that he said. They could see sharks basking in the sun, so they knew they wanted to get as close as they could to land. Yeah.
Colonel Cole, as you were sitting in that cockpit getting ready to launch, what was going through your mind?
How much time you got? All kinds of ideas. A lot of them are, I guess you'd call them wasted thinking. And some of them are positive, and fortunately the positive ideas and so forth survive.
Dad says that people ask him that quite, the cockpit of a B-25 is very small, okay? It's almost like 2 seats in here. And General Doolittle was Dad's childhood hero. A lot of the Raiders knew about him, but a lot of the younger enlisted guys didn't know who Doolittle was. But Dad was a second lieutenant, and General Doolittle at the time was a lieutenant colonel. And he's always said, back then, lieutenants are to be seen and not heard, and Dad's not chit-chatty anyway, and General Doolittle wasn't chit-chatty. He's a nice guy and everything like that, but they were doing business. It took both of them. Dad, tell them what you had to watch while you were flying.
Number one, over enemy territory, you had to watch the outside to alert the turret gunner in the rear. The only armament we had was a 30 caliber gun in the nose, which is more or less useless because it only had a range area of about 40 degrees. But in the rear, we had 250 caliber in a rotatable turret. For the idea that one of the guys had, that why don't we put two boomsticks sticking out of the rear of the B-25? And so we did. And every airplane had two black boomsticks sticking out of the rear of the airplane in case a fighter pilot came up from the rear.
They took out the rear guns in order for weight, and that's what he's talking about, sticking it in. But what was your job when you were flying across? You and General Doolittle had to trade off doing what?
We had the mixture part. A lot of you men, particularly women, may not understand about the mixture, but the control panel on the B-25, there's the throttles, the propeller controls, and the mixture that you move back and forth, that you can gives so much air to the carburetors. And we had to lean back so far that one of the tachometers started to fluctuate back and forth. So that engine was going to stop, and flying at 200 feet is not a good idea, and have an engine stop that out. So one of us had to watch it. Yeah.
This ended up between the Hornet and when they actually bailed out, it ended up being a 13-hour trip, and I've read numerous times that it's the longest trip the B-25s did because they had extra fuel, and nobody flies the plane until it runs out of gas. So they have that statistic also.
Nicole, I'm sure Tokyo was stunned when you bombed them, but were other cities bombed as well?
Yeah, were other cities bombed as well besides Tokyo?
Yes, there was Nagoya and Kobe farther down the island chain.
Colonel Paul, I understand they took the northern bomb sites out of the B-25. How accurate was the substitute bomb site that they put in instead?
Ross Greening is the one that came up with the ideas.
Yeah.
He was a captain. He came up with the ideas. Let Ray hold it, it's heavy. Ray built it, it's heavy. He came up with the idea to put the broomsticks in the back because they had to take the weight out. And he also came up with the...
It's a simple bomb site, and when they took the turret out, we replaced the turret hole with a 65-gallon gas tank.
That northern bomb site cost $10,000 in those days, but it was not accurate at 1,500 feet, which is the altitude predicted from the bomber. So they removed the northern bomb site from the plane, and for 20 cents, Ross Greening had this fabricated in the metal shop at Edmund Field.
Ed Baines and Ross Greening did it. Well,
but for 20 cents, and as I understand, this was very accurate.
yes. Also attached to the Norton bomb site, it was a brand new convention. And they didn't want if the planes went down over Japan, they didn't want them to fall, that equipment to fall into the Japanese hands. But also, the Norton bomb sight was attached to what other part of the plane?
Well, we thought we had an automatic pilot, but they didn't tell us, or maybe they didn't know, that when they took the darn bomb sight out, they took away part of the automatic pilot. We had the manhandle.
They had to manhandle it the whole 13 hours. General Doolittle and Dad had to have controls, so they had to trade off. They were working. So, okay, yes.
Colonel Saul, you were only a second lieutenant at the time. How long has it been since you graduated and got your wings before the raid?
When did you graduate from pilot training?
In July of 41.
And the raid was April of 42, so 9 months.
Ben, is there any of the B-25s displayed anywhere? Did they save any one of them? And did anyone get the Medal of Honor on this tour?
General Doolittle got the Medal of Honor. He was whisked back to the United States, and Roosevelt wanted to. Everybody was happy this happened. The whole Allied world was happy, okay? And so General Doolittle was given the Medal of Honor. He did not want to accept it. He wanted it to be each one of the Raiders to get it. But Marshall told him, the President of the United States is giving this to you, take it and be quiet. So he did. But none of the planes survived. One plane went to Russia, crew 8, and that plane, those men were interned. They weren't prisoners, but they couldn't go anywhere, for 14 months in Russia until they were able to escape. But that plane, we think, just ended up in the inventory. We were doing a lot of Lend-Lease with them, with the B-25, and we think they just took it into their inventory. Stalin was already compromised with Germany on the other side. He did not want to start something with Japan. So he wasn't, even though we were helping him, he wasn't helping us.
What was the quickest any of the Raiders got back to the American sides? Because I know Tom Griffith flew missions in Europe.
I'll answer that one. General Doolittle's the one that got back the fastest. I think he got the Medal of Honor on May 19th, but that wasn't his choice. Dad, the whole crew 1 was together within probably about 35 hours, okay? And the AVG had set up, which is American Volunteer Group, the Flying Tigers, in order to find out where their flyers were. They had set up a telephone grid in China. China didn't have electricity. I mean, you know, here we had outhouses and not a lot of electricity, early 40s. They had even, this was like 1800s, all right? But they had set up a telephone grid system, so when a flyer went down, the peasants could go and call, and they could come and get the flyer before the Japanese got a hold of them. So General Doolittle was able to use that system of the Chinese calling in to find out where the crews were. So within about 6 days, General Doolittle knew where probably 3/4 of the crews were. They knew 2 had been captured, but they didn't know what 2. But the first of the raid, other than General Doolittle getting back to the States, was John Griffin and, Tom Griffin, sorry, John, the son's in the audience there. There were 3 groups of Doolittle Raiders getting out of China. And some of those, when they got to India, got to come back to the States. So maybe about June 15th, that first, beginning of June, at least 15 or 20 were back in the States. But some of the people in that group didn't get orders, even though they were in India. So it was all up and down. 28 of them got left in what they call the CBI, China, India, Burma Theater.
Did the planes arrive to their assigned targets as a group, or were they somewhat dispersed?
It was all an individual because we couldn't afford to circle and form up because we had a worse gas system.
They had a gas problem, so they went individually, and they flew very low, and so they ended up, Crew 2 could see Crew 1, and I think you saw Hoover one time, right?
Yeah.
And some of the other crews could see, they got off the carrier within an hour, so they were all, within 5 or 10 minutes behind each other.
Before we took off, we also had 10 5-gallon cans of gas in the rear where the crew chief could dump it into the tank that we put in where the lower turret was.
Since they had to leave the target early, the Navy, the only thing the Navy could do was give them 50 more gallons of gas, which wouldn't get them very far, because they were anywhere between 150 to 200 miles more east than the Navy wanted to drop them off. So,
Is that Medal of Honor in any other part of the planes in the museum, the Doolittle Museum in Sacramento?
no, the General Doolittle's Medal of Honor is in Dallas at the library, University of Texas at Richardson, where there's an aviation archives, and his papers and his desk, just like the presidential things. His Medal of Honor is there in Dallas. And the plane in, didn't you ask me something? There is a museum called the James H. Doolittle Museum, Jimmy Doolittle Museum. The trouble is that it was on Travis's Air Force Base in the middle of it, and after 9/11, there's security problems, and so any of the bases that had museums close to the edge, like the Air Force Museum up here at Dayton, they didn't have any problem. But the ones that had facilities inside, they basically have had to raise money and to get new buildings to be further away, and they've been having problems with that. Yes?
Because the plans were changed due to a lot of factors, did each plane have a specific target, or was it kind of on their own?
Did each plane have its own target, or was it whatever they wanted to bomb?
No, what happened was that Colonel Doolittle let the pilots choose the target that they wanted to bomb. And consequently, some of them chose to go after factories. Others carried high explosives, and in our case, our target was northwest Tokyo. And the reasoning behind that was that if we would since he had planned to take off at dusk on the 19th, the number of airplanes that carried fire bombs went over Tokyo, and we wanted to set Tokyo on fire for two reasons. One was to do as much damage as we could, and the other was to give the following airplanes a line of reference in the darkness. Before we ended up over in a day like this, so it was kind of needed.
Their plane carried, like you said, the incendiary bombs. But most of Japan was wood, and so they figured they could fire. What they were trying to do was tell the Japanese people that their hierarchy was lying to them. And the only way you could do that was to have physical evidence there. Oh, we all know how politicians spin stuff, right? So they did that. But I'll tell you a story of Tom Griffin's. General Doolittle told him, do not bomb the Imperial Palace. And because General Doolittle, Colonel Doolittle, had been in England when the Germans bombed Buckingham Palace, and it just cemented everybody even more. And so Tom Griffin's group, they didn't bomb it, but they flew over because the Imperial Palace in Tokyo sits up on a hill. I mean, it's very distinct. It's on its own little mountain. And they flew over so low that he said they shook him out of his bed. So.
The other thing to mention about Tom Griffin and Davy Jones is Tom Griffin and Davy Jones were sent to Washington, D.C. by General Doolittle, and they collected all the maps and target and intelligence information that all of the targets were based upon. And of course, Tom Griffin's our own Cincinnati man. He lived here in Cincinnati and was our close personal friend.
Yes.
Have you ever taken off from an aircraft carrier before? That was different than land.
No, but the training we were taking for that up to it, or we could do it. We lowered the airplane as we wanted to take off day and practice with that weight. And most of the time the runway there at Akron, which was marked off with the carrier, we had about a 10-knot wind. On a takeoff day, in reality, we ended up with about a 23-knot wind for the natural wind and about the same amount from the carrier movement.
Taking off a carrier wasn't unique. It was taking a bomber off of a carrier. And the only reason the Japanese didn't come out after them is immediately when they found out that they were out there in the water, the task force, is they thought they were going to release fighters. They had to be in within 300 miles of Tokyo for the fighter to go out, hit its target, and come back to the carrier. A bomber can't come back to, it could, but it'd wipe out the whole top of the plane, I mean, of the boat. So, it wasn't feasible. So that's why the Japanese were planning to come out and attack them the next day. They thought they had 24 hours. They didn't have that time because they didn't know that the bombers were coming. That's what's unique. I mean, there's many unique things about it, but one of the main unique things is bombers taking off of an aircraft carrier.
Another unique thing about that Saturday morning is when Colonel Cole entered Tokyo around high noon, they had just finished an air raid alert and had taken all the precautions, and they thought that this was maybe part of their own aircraft flying over the city again.
They had this plane is a twin-tail airplane, and they had, what was it called, a Nell?
No.
A Nell, that's the American, it has a Japanese name, but they have a plane called the Nell that had a twin tail, and so the public thought it was one of theirs too, or considered theirs.
How old was General Doolittle at the time, and how old was the rest of the crew?
How old was General Doolittle at the time, and basically what was the average age of the crew?
Doolittle was 46. Some of the older pilots were probably maybe 25 or 27. 16 of the co-pilots, we were all in the same class in flying school. I think I was the oldest one. The rest of them were 20, 21. One young lad had his birthday when we crossed the date line, and he became 20 years old.
Yeah, there was 4 of them that were 20, that were 19 years old. Yes?
Has he ever taken off or landed on an aircraft carrier since that takeoff?
Have you ever taken off of an aircraft carrier since?
No.
On the 50th reunion, was it 50th in San Diego? It was the year of the 50th, because reunion wasn't there. There was a aircraft carrier called the Ranger. Pops, the Ranger down in San Diego?
No.
Ranger?
Yeah.
Down in San Diego, and they put three, no, I don't think it was Midway. It's an aircraft carrier. This is in this is now, modern day, not then. There was an aircraft carrier that they, for the 50th anniversary, that they put three B-25s on. Was it the Ranger?
No, it wasn't Ranger.
Well, anyway, there was an aircraft carrier down in San Diego that they put three B-25s on, and they took off again. But those things are huge now. I mean, they could put them side by side and probably take them off, you know, so it was similar, but not the same.
What was your dad's life like in his career after military?
It's great, he survived the war. What was your life like after, in your career and your life after the war?
Well, hard I remember is so far so good.
It's a toss-up between knowing General Doolittle and knowing my mom, because they got along very well all the way through, even with 5 kids hanging from the rafters. So he's been extremely lucky. Yes?
What are your thoughts being the last surviving Raider?
What are your thoughts being the last surviving Raider?
First off, it's not my fault.
I have a question.
The ticking hand that hasn't arrived at the critical place yet.
Over here.
I have a question.
Over here.
To be honest, I wonder about where luck came into the picture. And you have a sense of sorrow, but the rest of the guys are gone. But at the same time, you can't help the thought of I'm happy I'm still here. It sneaks in.
Dad was one of the older.
Paradox.
Dad was one of the older Raiders, and the last Raider to pass away was Dave Thatcher, and he was 6 years younger. And I mean, Dad and I never even talked about it, because 6 years, it's not 2 months or a year, it's 6 years, and he was in good health. So we all thought that he was going to be the last Raider. But
How old was your dad when he was flying?
he was 26.
26.
And the last Raider, Dave Thatcher, he was 20. So, I mean, there was a good age gap there. Go ahead,
I
sorry.
heard an interesting story about how you met your wife, and I was wondering if you could relate that. You already did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We were just in the Air Force Museum 2 weeks ago, and we saw the goblets.
Yes.
We saw, because it was Sergeant Thatcher and your dad's goblet, and there was a bottle of cognac from Jimmy Doolittle's birth year that had been opened to drink.
I was downstairs.
How did it taste?
How did the cognac taste?
Very smooth.
Tennessee told us that once they distill cognac so much that once they bottle it, it doesn't change. And even though it's 120 years old, 120 years old, because it was laid down in 1896, and I got to taste it too, and it was interesting, you know, being that old, you think, yeah, you know, poison, but no, it's pretty good. So, in the back.
Did your dad take any trips to China at the invitation of the Chinese government for celebrations?
Have you been back to China?
Yes, and '06, Tom Griffin and I were invited back to China the day of the celebrating of the end of the war with Japan. But the elements were very bad that day. We did not get to go to the area that they wanted to take us to, the area that we would have bombed and so forth. There was a big typhoon in that area, so we had to bypass that part.
They were trying to take him where they couldn't go. The terrain's very rough where his General Doolittle's plane went down, and I'm not sure what the terrain was like where Tom Griffin's went down, but I mean, it's still rough today, so not that they bombed it, it's where the planes went down. But they gave him a big tour. John went with us.
Lieutenant Cole, do you have any idea what you're volunteering for?
When you signed your name on the sheet, did you have any idea what you were volunteering for?
No, I'm not even sure I knew where Tokyo was.
I was wondering if the Japanese officers that broke the POW Geneva Convention rules and executed crew members, were they ever brought to justice?
No, not really. No, not really. They had a mock trial. They had a mock trial to execute the American flyers, the Doolittle Raiders, and then they had a mock trial basically afterwards. But I think part of that, I really haven't read up on that much, but I think part of it was because MacArthur comes in immediately and starts Japan getting back on its feet. Japan would have not, no one did that for Germany, and so there were many years of suffering for the German people and Europe, and it wasn't until the Berlin airlift did they get it organized and start helping that country get back on its feet. MacArthur went in there immediately. I'm surprised there aren't statues all over Japan, to MacArthur. And it's a good thing, because if you don't get these countries back on their feet, some other bad entity can come in and start all trouble again, so.
How many gallons of fuel per hour did those engines use?
Do you remember how many gallons of fuel per hour does on your trip, the B-25 at Ada?
Yeah, we were burning 86 gallons an hour. Actually, we doubled the gas capacity of the B-25 gas. It was normally 670 some gallons. We ended up pretty close to 1,200 gallons of fuel.
General Doolittle, before the raid happened, he had been working with Shell to perfect a higher octane, because he knew you could get more performance out of it, and he was coming to Wright-Patterson even in March of '42, trying to get better fuel. They did it because, we got it for the fighters for the P-51s, but they were working on that at that time. So, yes.
When President Truman decided to drop the atom bombs in August of '45, I would like to hear your dad's thoughts that he had at that time.
What do you think about Truman deciding to drop the atomic bombs on Japan?
Personally, I think it was the correct decision. A little more to that. Before Truman was elected, anybody in the service could not vote. And the first time I could vote was for Truman, and so I could vote.
He was a Republican then too, but voted Democrat. One more question. She's been, yeah, sorry about that.
James Brady's books, Flyboys. Is that anything in your father's trend of history that relates to American prisoners fighters on
How do you put this? Brady is a very good storyteller, but it's not very factual. But as long as the story's out there, it raises interest, and people go and find more facts. And they need to be told that that was horrendous. Like I said, you know, this was just the beginning of what was going to come, because Raiders were captured, they were tortured. They didn't have to storm beaches, but we get the idea, you know, it's war. But a lot of good things came out of war too, so. What's your, okay.
Is there a move afoot to award Colonel Cole the Congressional Medal of Honor?
No. Said, who was going to give you the Congressional Gold? They got the Congressional Gold Medal. The Medal of Honor belongs to General Doolittle. The Raiders have always been very happy with the attention and the medals and everything they've gotten. They've gotten a lot more attention than anybody else in the war. They're the best known group. They're the most signed group, meaning they sign the most. They've gotten lots of attention. That one small thing, thousands of things have been written on them. So they had no idea. They're happy that General Doolittle's name's out there because he deserves it.
Well, basically, the regular Army pilots, there were quite a few of them that went after Mitchell. When in this of Doolittle's ability and so forth, and so he didn't have too many friends, and had he had more friends, I think he would ended up as being the director of defense, Secretary of Defense.
What he's getting at is at that time, all of our officers, 85% of our officers came from the Naval Academy or West Point. And only 15%, 10 to 15% came from our colleges, okay? Meaning they went through college and then they went through an officer candidate school and went into the service. And that's a unique, it's opposite now. We only have 15 coming from the academies. And, but almost all of World War II, all the generals or admirals, 99% of them came out of the academies. So they had a close clique, but they got the job done, so that's what counts. So.
Well, we've reached the end of our get-together this afternoon, but before we leave, I'd like to have all veterans in the room please stand and be recognized. I want to thank you for attending today, and thank you so much, Colonel Cole, for being here.
You're welcome.
Folks, may I just let you know something? I've known Ray for quite a while now, and of those of you who do not know him, I'll bet you the man spends 100 hours a week interviewing veterans, and he's a walking encyclopedia of the Doolittle Raiders and probably everything else you want to know. Ray, thank you.
To you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform. Because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task, we now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace. Harry Truman, President of the United States.
California to Vermont, is the info that you want. On where to go, 'cause the brochures don't tell you anything except the fare. But Smiley himself will take you there. So come along, one and all, come along with us. Travel with Smiley, travel with Smiley. Destinations off the beaten path. North, south, east, or west. Smiley's guidance is the